It's time to make sports talk great again with Curt Schilling and Steve Deace.
And greetings. Hopefully you had a great weekend. Welcome to The Blaze, where we talk sports. I am Steve Deace. He is Curt Schilling, World Series champion and future Hall of Famer. We put 25 minutes on the clock, so whether you're watching on YouTube or listening via podcast, and if you are, give us a like and a subscribe, please, a 5-star review as well. Or you're just tuning in right here on The Blaze. We get to as many of today's sports topics in that amount of time as we possibly can. Are you ready to go, Curt Schilling?
I am ready to go, Stan.
Good, because Stanley Excelsior, thank you, because your team is on the clock beginning right now. So as free agency begins in the NFL today, actually, teams can begin negotiating with players and then start signing them on Wednesday. And unlike your league, where the last couple of years this has gone on well into spring training, most of the best players in the NFL are going to be done and signed in a week at the most. Okay. And the NFL salary cap has gone up 50% since it was first in the last decade. It was originally the first ever NFL salary cap was $34.6 million. This year it's 188.2, if you can believe that. All right. So there's some salary growth for you that's not apparently happening in your sport, at least according to your owners. But the big story on the eve of free agency was actually a trade.
Why do I sense your joy as we get into this topic? Why am I feeling that you're happy about this?
Well, I like being right. I told you they weren't going to get a first-round pick for him, and they didn't. And the great irony is I told you the only team that would even consider it would be the Raiders because they have 3, and you don't want all. And I could see a school of thought where you're worried if you hit on all 3 of those first-round draft picks that they all hit their free agent year the same year and break your cap, right? So maybe you drop one of those first-round picks and for a first-round pick another year for, you know what I'm saying, right? Or for an Antonio Brown. Well, the Raiders got him from your Steelers anyway. And they didn't give up one of those 3 first-round picks. They didn't even give up a second-round pick. They gave up a third-round pick and a fifth-round pick. If every league's kind of have the trade map, or the trade math of what the data of what it's worth. Essentially, they got Antonio Brown for what amounts to the 44th ranked player in the 2019 NFL Draft. And if you really look at what John Gruden did. Because I know they have Mike Mayock, who I'm a huge fan of. I loved his work on NFL Network. But he's only been the GM for a month or two. If you look at the groundwork John Gruden laid a year ago, he took a lot of heat for this. The Amari Cooper trade, he got a number 1 for him. He essentially traded it. Listen, Amari Cooper's a really good player. Take recent antics aside and straight up, Antonio Brown, Amari Cooper, who you taking? Antonio Brown. And all 32 NFL general managers are. Okay? Right. Antics aside. So he essentially upgraded at receiver, got a first-round pick for Amari Cooper. That's a pretty good deal for the way the Raiders look at it. And I want to show this from a Steeler perspective. Look at this piece of data. Dead money is what you pay a guy to not be on your roster. That's what the NFL calls it. And this is
because they did not trade him.
No, this is because they traded him after signing him to a huge contract extension, I think after the 2016 season. Okay. So I want to show our audience this Fielding Yates tweet. So look at this. If you're watching us today on YouTube or The Blaze, let me read it for those of you that are just listening. Antonio Brown will now count more against the Steelers' cap while not playing for them. $21.12 million of dead money than any other wide receiver will count for his own team in 2019. I have never, ever seen anything like that in the history of the NFL salary cap, ever. Maybe a sudden retirement, but a lot of times now with the most recent CBA, actually the last couple of CBAs, if a Barry Sanders does what he did, which is retire on my Lions, teams can go back and recoup that dead money from him and make him pay them back. The Lions did it twice, actually, to Barry Sanders and Calvin Johnson, for example. So this is unprecedented in the history of the NFL. We see this in baseball a lot where
it's commonplace.
Where you have dead money because you sign a Justin Verlander to a 10-year deal when he's 32, and when he's 38, 39, 40, he's not worth the money, but you pay him for what he already did and to have him in those early years, right? But in the NFL hard cap era, we've never seen, in fact, in the history of the NFL, we can make this statement based on this money. There has never been a player a franchise has wanted to be rid of more in the history of this league than the Steelers, dropping Antonio Brown and a willingness to essentially eat $21 million in cap money and pay him more than any receiver will get paid by the team they're actually on this fall. Your reaction to that alone before we talk about the Steelers' big picture, Curt?
Well, I think this puts an exclamation point on probably the worst 12-month period in the history of this franchise since I've been alive. I mean, this was the trade. If Antonio Brown was miserable last year with Ben Roethlisberger making the money he's making, what do you think he's going to be this year? The Raiders aren't. Maybe I'm wrong, but the Raiders aren't contending for a Super Bowl this year.
No, they're building up for making a big splash for when they debut in Vegas in 2020. That's what they're doing.
Okay. Is it? Because I'm wondering if this is a rebuild move, or if this is a reconstruction move. I mean,
they were about $70 million under the cap, so they could easily absorb his number.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, so they're going to have what a top 5 pick this year too.
Yeah. And 2 other first-round picks.
Yep. And all indications are they'll grab an edge pass rusher at first, and with I don't know. I don't know about the Raiders making this move if it makes sense for them, but again, they have a lot of cap room. It's fine.
Do you think I'm overstating it that given what the Steelers are eating here, we have never seen a team more eager to get rid of a guy
this
than
last 12 months
in the history of the NFL?
Yeah, and I think it's because that he and Le'Veon Bell turned the Steelers into something they've never been in, which is a soap opera.
Mm-hmm.
That you look back on Chuck Noll and Bill Cowher and all in the history of the Steelers has always been about stability. This was the worst, most unstable, unwatchable season in the Steelers' history, and now you're looking at a 37-year-old quarterback who. I don't know. I just think that there's somebody needs to right the ship, and I think the ship starts getting righted by getting rid of Mike Tomlin.
I'll say this about Gruden too, because I've heard people pontificate how do John Gruden and Antonio Brown get along. I mean, John Gruden has been really close to the league for the last several years, calling Monday Night Football games. He is not unaware.
He will not have any issues getting along with. Yeah,
he is not unaware of Antonio Brown's act.
No.
You know, so
John. Yeah,
I don't know that that's a big issue.
John, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not, because if you watch John Gruden on that quarterback college, when he does all those things, he can adapt to whoever's in the room. That's part of why I think that $10 million annually was paid, is because I think the head football coach is a lot like the manager in baseball, in the sense that
you saw this in Monday Night Football. He worked with Mike Tirico, then he worked with Sean McDonough, and then when he left, they had took 2 guys to replace him, and neither one of them could. So that goes to what you're talking about.
You have an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator. If they're really, really good, your job in football is very much like in baseball. You got to manage your people, right? You'll have input on offense and defense and all things that go with that, but you're all about managing those 53 players and putting them in a position to succeed and making them want to play for you. And I think that's an absolute strength of his.
And I think Antonio Brown has to understand on some level, however big he thinks his personality is, it's not bigger than that guy's. All right? And given the moves that guy has made and the contract he has, they could absolutely, if Antonio Brown wants to turn this into the Terrell Owens show, John Gruden has absolute power and authority to slit his throat and cut him off and say, hey, you're on the free market. I'm not putting up with this. You know?
Well, and
I got a longer contract with you than I'm making almost as much money. So screw you. Yeah.
Yeah. This is it's an interesting. It puts the Raiders into a very interesting place, and I agree with you. I think it is that move to help sell tickets when they move to Vegas.
So let's go to your Steelers in the big picture. You alluded to the amount of drama, and I've anecdotally said this has had to be the most drama-filled offseason or 12 months this franchise has had since Chuck Noll first went through, the Rooney family's front office to interview for the head coaching job. Just let's quantify this a little bit. I was looking at some of these numbers last night. I mean, these are incredible, really. The Steelers have had 7 losing seasons in the last 46 years. I went back that far because I'm going to be 46 in July, okay?
Yeah.
So in my lifetime, The Steelers have had 7 losing seasons to go along with 30 playoff appearances and 6 Super Bowl wins. And that's a model of consistent excellence in a league that is driven by Pete Rozell's anybody can beat anybody on any given Sunday parity-driven model. They have elevated themselves above this. And I'm wondering, though, hey, it's like Q once said to Jean-Luc Picard in the greatest series finale of all time, the final episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. All good things must come to an end, Jean-Luc. All right? 37 years old is Ben Roethlisberger. Yes, he did lead the league in passing yards, but also interceptions. This past year, Le'Veon Bell, gone. Antonio Brown, gone. 30-year-old Cam Hayward is their only Pro Bowl player on defense. The team has a 3-5 playoff record since they won the Super Bowl in 2010 when Troy Polamalu was the NFL Defensive Player of the Year. That seems like it was a decade ago. They've missed the playoffs 3 times, including this past season. They've missed the playoffs 3 times since then as well. So is this just a transition, or are we concerned here about the future of the Steelers, given where they're at right now?
Let's start with a couple things. First off, Ben Roethlisberger is the Rob Gronkowski of quarterbacks. We're not sure every year if he's going to retire. I don't blame
And he brings
anybody.
it up too, just like Gronkowski does. We're not speculating. Roethlisberger talks about this the last few years. He has, yeah. Now this year he is not, though. He is not this year.
You're a sub 500 roster, and you just lost 2 Hall of Fame players. Would you argue that either one of those is I mean, they're both Hall of Fame offensive
I think
players.
More than likely, I would say Antonio Brown for sure. Le'Veon Bell has another year or 2 like we've seen, then I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you got rid of 2 Hall of Fame offensive players. You replaced them in with Juju Schuster-Smith, which
we know he's a really good number 2 receiver. We'll see how good he is when he's everybody's target this season.
And then you got James Conner in the backfield.
Yeah.
But you lost 2 Hall of Famers. So you can't be getting better, number one. And number 2, you had those 2 Hall of Famers and you couldn't win. So what
3-5 in the playoffs since 2010. That's what you're talking about.
What would make you think going ahead and this team is drama. I love him to death, but I don't think he has this team anymore. I think he's been one of the main reasons they've gotten beaten in the past. I think he's been I just don't. He hasn't created waves in a sense that like a Gruden or somebody, but I don't think he's done the Steelers right. I don't.
You're talking about Mike Tomlin.
Yeah, Mike Tomlin. I don't think he's a good coach. And the ownership family of the Rooneys and everybody else involved in owning the Steelers has always been about. Well, listen, the Pittsburgh Steelers are Pittsburgh. If you look at Pittsburgh as a steel town and all the things that go with the history, the one thing that remember the movie All the Right Moves?
Sure.
With Tom Cruise.
It's an old school Tom Cruise 80s classic, you bet, as the high school quarterback.
Great.
Yeah.
That is Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
The Steelers are the lifeblood of that town and that city. And they're not going to let this stand. And I don't know what that means.
See, I think Mike Tomlin is a very good coach. I just think you've been there since 2007. You know, Bill Parcells used to say, and he hasn't coached since like 2007, and he used to say he leaves every 5 or 6 years because everybody's heard it all before. Yeah. You know, and when analytics came and sabermetrics, the NFL version, the NFL prefers the term analytics, so it doesn't look like they're copying baseball. But basically, when we're talking about when sabermetrics came to the NFL, Mike Tomlin's kind of built like you. He's an old school guy, doesn't care about that stuff. So there's never been another step in his evolution. And so all the veteran, you've heard this all before, you know, and that's what would concern me if I were a Steeler fan. I mean, if Mike Tomlin were at the open market, he'd be the number 1 candidate for any NFL head coaching vacancy. But what would concern me about where they're at right now is he is your player's coach. Guys, they play hard for him. They rally to him, right? And so when the other players, and let's just be brutally honest here, okay? When you have black players on the team that are stars, that there's a common cultural bond there, and he's not able to get them to assimilate into a greater system, that indicates to me that he's kind of lost his grip on the team. You hear more from Ben Roethlisberger than you hear from him. Say what you want about Tom Brady. You never hear more from Tom Brady in terms of disciplining the team than Bill Belichick, ever.
I was going to jump in there, and I know people hate to hear it, but does this not make you look at Bill Belichick with just a little bit more awe? That change the voice every 5 years has been going on for 19 years now in New England? I mean, that's impressive in this sport, especially.
Yeah, I think it's just, frankly, I think he's just it's time to move on. And for a new voice and a new approach to be heard. That's what I think.
Sometimes honest to God, most of the time it really is that simple.
It's just hard to do this with guys that are making this kind of money over and over and over and over and over again. That's another reason why the Patriots don't pay huge money to guys over 30 typically. Guys come and go. It's because the system they demand is so rigid.
Well,
such a commitment to a hive mind that after a while, guys just want to break out and be their own man and don't want to conform to that system. And it's no hard feelings. Then it's time for you to go somewhere else. That's all.
This winter's Trey Flowers, Michael Bennett move is going to be a Belichick masterpiece again.
Well, and it's funny too because Michael Bennett's one of those guys likes to cry fake racism. The Vegas police beat me up, and then TMZ comes up with the video and they actually show him hiding out, and it was actually 2 non-white cops. Okay, and of course, we only hear about the original accusation on the ESPN crying, and then the crawler never tells us later on when the video points out that this was totally made up and a scam. He's now seen his career kind of drop like a rock after he was considered maybe the best defensive lineman in the NFL 3 years ago. Yep. So, he could not possibly have conformed to the Patriot system when he was trying to get his SJW points. But dude needs to get his career back. All right.
And this is where you do it.
And this is where you go. This is kind of, if you're a player, if you're Corey Dillon, Ocho Cinco, Randy Moss, okay, or Michael Bennett, if you're a great player, it's a little bit like if you're a coach who's lost his way, you go down and you're an analyst for Nick Saban for a year or two, and he puts his hands on you and suddenly you're healed and you now can you're hireable again. All right. So if you're a formerly great player and you lost your way, whatever, and you need to get your mojo back for one more big contract, you go out to New England and agree to keep your mouth pie hole shut and play your ass off for a year, and suddenly you're a marketable player again. Well, that's what Michael Bennett's doing.
It's amazing how he'll be a redemption story.
Yeah.
If they win the Super Bowl, he'll be redeeming himself for his own stupidity. But the point is taken, right? I mean, you go on television and he'll be the comeback story of the year for some reason. But that's exactly why he signed with the Patriots.
So we've been following this stat throughout the course of the college basketball season. And now with the regular season over and March Madness looming, the postseason in earnest, we've already had a few teams clinch berths to the NCAA tournament. Here's this stat again. Since Ken Palm, that's Ken Pomeroy, is the analytics guy, the guy in college basketball. All right. His website, Ken Palm, is probably the #1 college basketball website on planet Earth. Since Ken Palm began doing his analytics, and his analytics, for those of you that are new to this, he measures efficiency more than anything. All right. So everybody likes to say algorithms are objective. No, they're not, because some human element determined what the algorithm should place a priority on, what it weighs more often. Okay. And Ken Pomeroy's analytics, he puts his analytics are heavily favor efficiency, or the basketball equivalent of a war. Okay. So how good you are per possession on the offensive and defensive ends and against the quality of competition you're facing. Okay. So since Ken Pomeroy began his analytics in 2002, every NCAA tournament champion but one was top 20 in both offensive and defensive efficiency at the end of the regular season. That is the 8 teams. These 8 teams are those teams. Virginia, and the difference between this Virginia team and the others that flamed down the NCAA tournament, they're still playing that pack line defense, but their offensive efficiency is top 10 in the country. This is the best offensive team Tony Bennett's had. Gonzaga. Now, I would say, though, even though Gonzaga did beat Duke in the non-conference, Indiana has more quad 1 wins. This is another story where Gonzaga doesn't play anybody for 2 months. So we've seen them that result in a lot of NCAA tournament disappointments for them. We'll see if that continues. You have Duke, but of course, almost all of those analytics have been built with Zion Williamson as a force of nature in the middle. Mike Krzyzewski was adamant after losing to North Carolina on Saturday night that Zion is going to be back. back for the ACC tournament? We shall see. You have Michigan State, which is pretty much on this list almost every single year, under Tom Izzo, and Cassius Winston might be the first-team All-American point guard, and they always defend in East Lansing. You have North Carolina, who their offensive efficiency, I mean, this might be the most explosive offensive team in the country with their total collection of athletes and shot makers. They're not great defensively all the time, but when they commit themselves to playing defense, with those athletes, they are great. You have Michigan, which the last couple of years has transferred its reputation of being more of a defensive team. And Michigan, I think, is built this year somewhat like some of the Virginia teams of the past years, where they don't have the shot makers they've had in years past. And I think that's what's hurt them in the 2 games they've lost to Michigan State, including this past weekend. But this is still one of the top 2 or 3 teams. I think they're number 2 in defensive efficiency behind Virginia in the sport. You have Kentucky, which looked like it was starting to turn a corner to becoming a number 1 seed about 2 weeks ago, but has kind of hit a wall in the last couple of weeks and didn't really take the next step that a lot of people were anticipating, still though supremely talented. And the new entry on the list is the University of Houston. They had the man bun guy there last year, Rob Gray. They were one of the surprise teams under Kelvin Sampson, and they lost him. And now this year, the sum of total of the parts is greater than, or the sum is greater than the individual parts. So they're kind of the mid-major darling along with Gonzaga. As we look now and get set with Selection Sunday, 6 days away, you look at that list and you think what, Curt?
I think that anytime you can find an algorithm that confirms what experts believe, that list of teams right there would be probably part of a list of any expert's top college programs. I love the statistic, by the way, the analogy, the offensive and defensive efficiency, which is basically a very fundamental way to figure out how good you are when you have the ball and how good you are when you don't have the ball.
Right.
And these teams line up with what you'd expect, and you always find the outlier, right? I mean, the Gonzagas, but like the Houstons, that's the one where the gamblers and then the bettors always win a lot of money, and the average. Yeah,
because the public hasn't overpriced the lines in those games because they don't know who that is. That's right.
Yep. And so, I don't know about you, but short of one of the greatest upsets ever, I think the national champion is in this list. Do you?
More than likely. One thing, I had Mike DeCourcy at the Big Ten Network push back on me for this stat over the weekend via Twitter, and saying, well, you're looking at the Ken Palm numbers after the tournament. You need to look at what they were after the regular season. And then he pointed out, over the course of those 17 NCAA tournaments, there were 2 teams that played their way into the top 20 in the NCAA tournament. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about 2 teams out of 68 NCAA tournament teams over 17 years. Okay?
Right.
That to me only reinforces this stat, because let me give you an example. When you have 30 plus games of data, all right, you're not going to go, I don't care who you play in the NCAA tournament, you're not going to go from like 75th in offensive efficiency to top 20. You're not going to overcome 30 games of data against the top % of competition in 6 games. You're not. Now, you might go from 31st in offense to top 20. You might do that, but you're not going to go up 25 spots. What's that?
How many possessions in a college basketball game do you have?
Well, that's where it comes down to the tempo, and that's why you go by points per possession.
You're looking at thousands of examples. So I would make an argument 10, 15 games is more than enough to get the sample size you need. When you're talking about the minuscule outlier that you were, which is 2 in out of 68 teams in 17 tournaments, which is insanely small percentage,
right?
Then you can safely say
like a team like a Maryland, for example. All right, so they're top 25 in both offensive and defensive efficiency. All right, if they raise their big offensive efficiency problem is they turn the ball over too much. If they stop turning the ball over, and young teams do that, they're the youngest team in the Power 5. If they stop turning the ball over, could they go from 25th in offensive efficiency to 18th by making the NCAA tournament Final Four? Sure, they could, but that only reinforces this stat, because in order to get into the top 20, they had to be the most offensively efficient against the best teams in the country than they were all year long. Okay, so I don't think it diminishes the stat at all, actually. No. I want to quickly preview tomorrow's show, because we were going to talk again about Kyler Murray, and we've done that a million times. But tomorrow's show, we're going to do all baseball for 25 minutes. And we're going to make this kind of a free-flowing, less structured, moving from topic to topic, because I saw a fascinating piece at MLB.com I read yesterday. And I sent it to you and I said, we got to do a show on this. And it's the top 15 spring training cliches. Basically, it's a chance to, are you getting fed horse manure? Or is this for real? And I'm reminded of something Sparky Anderson, when he used to manage my Tigers, used to say, every year at the end of spring training, he would call his wife back home in Michigan, and he would tell her, honey, here's where we're going to finish in October. But he would never tell the media. And he was right almost every single year, from like 1979 to 1992. That's how long he coached our team, I think, or managed our team. He was right almost every year, or pretty close to right, okay? So how much is what we are fed in spring training horse manure, and how much of it should we really buy into? I'm looking for, and I want you to give us some individual examples from your playing days when you heard some of this stuff as well.
How many times did Sparky end up with a Chris Patero?
Or Torey Lavello, or Barbaro Garbe.
Gonna be the greatest player that ever lived.
But you know what? He was right. Kurt Gibson wasn't Mickey Mantle. That's who he compared him to. But Kurt Gibson was a hell of a player. All right.
Yeah, but Sparky was that guy that I'm going to do this every spring, and eventually I'm going to accidentally get one right.
Right. And so on our '84 World Series team, Kurt Gibson was the only team in the majors that year, had 20 home runs and 20 stolen bases in the same year. And of course that was the year, that was the one he got right, But yes, that's why, because we're watching this now, and the season is only a couple of weeks away. So I'm curious if you're following your team, and we always have teams that come out of nowhere that shock us, right?
Right.
And so maybe when the coach says, "Hey, there's really good chemistry on this team,"
right,
maybe they're telling us the truth. How do we know? How do we quantify whether this is a cliche or an omen? We're going to get to that right here tomorrow on The Blaze. Thank you, Curt.
All right, see you tomorrow, bud.
Take care.